Sunday night on C-SPAN's Q&A. Only one thing separates Bill Gates and Instapundit.com's Glenn Reynolds.
And Bill Gates looked at it and said, you know, if I make software for that, I can get rich. And I looked at it and said, you know, if somebody made some software for that, I might buy one.
Instapundit.com's Glenn Reynolds, Sunday at 8 Eastern and Pacific on C-SPAN's Q&A. You can also listen to Q&A on C-SPAN Radio, XM Satellite Radio Channel 132, and Sirius Satellite Radio Channel 139. It's also online as a C-SPAN podcast. A congressional delegation made up of Florida Republican Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, Massachusetts Democrat Steve Lynch, and Pennsylvania Republicans Todd Platts and Jim Gerlach recently visited several countries in the Middle East on an information-gathering trip. Accompanied by a C-SPAN video journalist, they spent the first day of the trip in Kuwait, with several visits in and around the capital of Kuwait City. One of their stops was a meeting with the editor-in-chief of Kuwait's largest newspaper.
Thoughts about our presence here for a day, and then we might have some questions for you too, as we look to you as the media here in this country, and some thoughts we might have. So, turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Kuwait. My name is Jassim Boudet, a humble citizen of this country, a journalist, someone who works in this field. We here own and run the only private TV station in Kuwait and the #1 newspaper in Kuwait. I would like just to ask you a simple question before you start your discussions. I have no time limits. It's up to you. My only question is, how diplomatic you want me to be?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Just let me know.
The more frank, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Then the ball in your court. Welcome again to Kuwait. Thanks for your
Well, so we had a very interesting meeting before we came here with a group of ladies who are very politically active and are very interested in the elections in 2007 for Parliament, and a few of them expressed interest in being candidates, and they were very passionate about the opportunity that the election in 2007 provides for women in Kuwait to become part of the parliamentary process. And Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, our chairwoman, who, by the way, is the subcommittee chair of the Middle East subcommittee of the House International Relations Committee. So she's a very important member of Congress for purposes of our visit as a delegation to this area. So what I found interesting was their passion and the desire to have women get involved in the political process, hopefully get elected to a few seats to Parliament and be part of the agenda making for the country. But they were different in their opinions as to how successful they would be in 2007 to actually get a woman elected. What is your view from a journalistic standpoint about their opportunities for being candidates and for being successful?
Before going into the women's issue, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Just like the press.
Was that diplomatic? Yeah. Was that diplomatic or not diplomatic?
Let me ask you a question. In this part of the world, the Gulf, the peninsula, other than Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Yemen, we talk about pure dictatorships where democracy as far as Australia from here. Kuwait is looked at as more democratic than the rest of the Gulf. Right. My question to you, you come from the United States, which is a democratic country. England is a democratic country. France is a democratic country. On the other hand, I can name as many dictatorships as you want. Syria today is a dictatorship. North Korea, for example. Iraq before. That's the other extreme. But I think that in today's world, you are either a democracy or a dictatorship. Where would you rate Kuwait?
I think we should, being diplomatic that I am, turn it over to our subcommittee chairman on the Middle East,
I hope you don't believe that we're a democracy, to start with.
Tell me why.
Why? You tell me why we can say we are a democracy.
You elect a parliament, correct?
Mm-hmm.
From districts, correct?
Okay.
They have a say on some policy here in this country,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Some.
Some. Okay.
Is that enough?
That's not enough.
I mean, well, it talks here.
Well, I would analogize it to your emerging democracy. When we became a free nation, a democracy 200 plus years ago, basically male landowners got to vote, and the powers of the federal government actually were very different than what they are today. So in the sense of the right to vote now being expanded to women, having a say, those who are elected having a say in the laws of your land. It maybe is not a pure democracy, but I don't know if anyone would say what is a absolutely pure democracy. All democracies, to some sense, are evolving democracies, and yours may be more of an emerging democracy, but you certainly have some of the pillars of a democracy in place to build on.
That's great, but if you want to compare, if you want to look at the United States 200 years ago, Europe, I don't know how many 100 years ago, that's different. We are in the 21st century now. At that time, you were on your own till you reached where you reached. Today, it's different. Today we have the mighty United States, our guardian, our custodian, you name it what you want to name it. But don't you think that you should be more involved in seeing that we become more democratic?
Well, would that be counterproductive for the people in the country? Would they look at Americans as trying to come in and tell you what to do and therefore be counterproductive?
Frankly, my question is always between me and myself. Would that be productive for your administration, for your country? I mean, would you like us to be more democratic, or you would prefer us to remain like this? Is it all you are interested in here? The human being? I always compare the Gulf, the relation of the United States. I always compare Japan and the Gulf. I feel, I might be wrong, but excuse me being frank. I always feel that your main concern in Japan is what's above the ground, the human being there. While your main concern, or your only concern in this part of the world, is what's underground, oil. Not caring whoever is opening the valve every morning. Well, it's vice versa in Japan, for example. We need to see more here. Look at, now you might say, okay, with oil, we have to sell more than you have to buy, otherwise we'll not live, not exist. But on the other hand, a country like Saudi Arabia, for example, you thought for a long time that the danger will come from the Shiite sides of Islam, from Iran. But you were hit, severely hit, from your allies, from the Sunnis, from the Wahhabis, from the Saudis. And I don't see a lot of improvements after the 9th of September.
Improvements in what? You see a lot of improvements in what?
In the Saudi system, for example, in preventing what happening in the future. I think 2001 till today, all what's happening in Saudi Arabia, for example, and the rest of the Gulf, is cosmetics. You went to Iraq. You are in Iraq now. Now, a lot of people might think this was wrong. You hear a lot of arguments, but to me, at least, you are there. You cannot afford now to leave till you say, put them on the right track. Fix a lot of things that has to be fixed. You chose one hell of a place to start. I mean, with the Iraqis, the worst. But if it's going to work in Iraq, it will work everywhere. But either do it this way or not. So that brings us back. I, for one, don't see a democracy here in Kuwait. But you tell me, what are you doing? I tell you.
Well, I think that also we have to look at other parts of the world that may pose a serious danger to our national security, and not so much that we have a role to play in forcing others to adopt our way of government, but we do have a role in helping countries to, or leaders of those countries to see why it's in their best interest not to oppress their people and not to deny them fundamental rights. And I think that far greater a problem does the United States have with dictatorships than with places that aren't Jeffersonian democracies but are strong allies of the United States and who pose no danger to us. Therefore, whether we would like Kuwait to do more in terms of empowering its own people, yes, but there's so many other countries that aren't up to Kuwait standards in terms of freedoms and non-endangering the United States that we're looking elsewhere to spread our goodwill.
But, I mean, going back to this part of the world, the Shah of Iran was a very strong ally of the United States. But because he was the one and only Shah, a dictator, suddenly Khomeini took over. The Saudi regime, for the last 70, 80 years, is one of the strongest allies of the United States. But suddenly, 15 out of the 19 were Saudis. And not poor, humble Saudis.
No, educated.
Educated, well off. That raises a lot of questions. Iraq, again, on the other hand, Iraq, today we see people dying every day. We see car bombs every day. We see blood every day. But you ask me today, I think if we live 5 years from now, I would tell you that I would think in 5 years from now, I'll see a much more democratic Iraq than Saudi Arabia, for example, or the Emirates. That's what we want. I mean, here in Kuwait, I mean, you arrived today, and I'm sure you were briefed that we have a crisis, a political crisis. We're looking for a president, by the way. That's how we do it. And we meet in the morning, in the evening, the royal family. It's not far from the 2001 crisis, yes, you had in the States. A bit different. I think people ask me who's running the country. I think for the last 35 years, the real ruler, president, emir, name it what you want, of this country is Burgan oilfield. That oilfield, you know, 95% of the people of Kuwait are government employed, public sector. That Burgan oilfield pays every month the salaries of 95% of the people of Kuwait. As long as Burgan pumps, it pays every month.
So that's the emir already.
That's the emir. People won't care who is sitting in Bayan Palace. But that has been going on for the last 35, 40 years now. In spite of all that, if that Burgan oilfield delays payment of salaries for 1 or 2 weeks in a month, then you won't find anyone in Bayan Palace or our White House. Things will change. That's because of that, because of the wealth, the enormous wealth spread everywhere. Everything is not taken very seriously here in Kuwait, including politics, including the parliament, including the elections. Women got their rights. I don't think in 2007 we'll see any women in the parliament. It's not because...
They didn't think so either.
It's not because...
One said three.
It's not because we don't want to, but unfortunately, there are still most of them, the majority of women here in Kuwait, even the educated ones, are still not used to that idea. They are not interested. I tell you, this is bad, but I have to say it. Next year, if you are here on the elections day, I can take you around to some very educated, intellectual women who will miss going to vote if on that date there is a new fashion show or new shop opening.
And you're more democratic than you think, because that happens in our country every year.
That's an aspect of a democracy. You get to choose whether you want to go vote or go shopping. Hopefully you go vote, but that's part of being a free democracy. And the United States in the involvement here, and I was going to bring it back to the issue of women voting, because any democracy you have to build, and you start with somewhere and then build on it. And in 1992, after the Gulf War, the reconstituting of the parliament by the emir, I wasn't in Congress then, but my understanding of that was our government, President Bush, and our leadership helped to make that happen, and that they've been liberated and returned to your country, and to return to some of those democratic principles, reconstituting the parliament. The election next year is another step, and the media certainly plays an important role in a democracy. A free and open press is very important to our democracy. And so your role here, including in a very significant change in the way your emerging democracy operates, women voting, you play a huge role in whether that really succeeds, and women not just come out to vote, but whether they run for office. And so I'm interested to bring it back, because it sounded like a politician when we asked the question. You immediately went to a different topic. But if we can get your perspective, you don't think, you think there'll be many women who seek office, who actually willing to put their names on the ballot?
First of all, the question is how many will practice their right, will go on vote. I think the majority who will go and vote will be the ones maybe you and I don't like to see them going to vote, who are the Islamists, the guys, the women who are one way or the other linked to Islamic parties or groups, or who can control their women much more than us, for example. I, for one, cannot force my wife or my daughter or my sister to go and vote or not, or vote for Mr. X or Mr. Y, or I can't do it. And that's democracy. I'm not supposed to. While there I mean the wife or the sister or the daughter of a guy who belongs to one of those, not necessarily Al-Qaeda or Bin Laden, but something similar, even way going down the less tough parties or groups. Or no, it's part of the religion that the woman obeys her husband or brother, and he'll tell her, either go and vote for Mr. X or out, you're divorced. Or so you will see there that the more Islamic oriented groups with Islamic ideology will be voting. You remember the Algerian experience in 1991, 92, where they got their democracy for the first time, and then the Islamic parties took over, simply because they are more organized, much more organized. On the other hand, unfortunately, the other groups in Kuwait, the liberals, the modern, the open-minded, are lazy compared to the Islamists. And that's one of my worries. That's where, and in Kuwait, women represents 50%. By the way, we saw the statistics last week or the week before. More women are registered now, voters, than men in Kuwait. The question is, who will control the women? In the area where part of the community where you want them to be voting, they won't. They are the lazy ones. In the areas where you wish they'll stay at home and not get involved, they'll be the active ones. So as a result of that, I'm expecting in the 2007, supposed to be a parliament here in Kuwait, more Islamists, more, whether you call them fundamentalists, whether you call them extremists or whatever, winning as a result of women's voting. Now, what scares me is, because of our political, I told you, weird, strange political system, where our government is not, it's not a constitutional monarchy here, where the royal family, just like England or wherever, our government is not from the parliament. So the crown prince or the prime minister appointed by the emir, who is always a member of the royal family, will choose a government whom, as a result of that system, because you cannot change the prime minister, it's not the parliament who will change it. The prime minister is not the head of the party who won the elections. The nearest example is Israel to us, for example. There, unfortunately, what happened over the years, and because parties are not allowed here, elections are, people wins individually. The prime minister, who is a senior member of the royal family, forms a government. He chooses one or two from the parliament, the rest from outside. Because it's individuals, for him to continue working, unfortunately, especially when he's old, like the last 10 years, he wants to keep everybody happy, to keep everybody quiet. So one way or the other, the government is always, although it is supposed to take the initiatives as a government in the development in the country, in the running of the country. What's happening here, because of our system, strange system, the government is always reacting to actions taken by the parliament, by members of the parliament, where they're not only legislating and supervising, they're interfering in everything, because they want to benefit one way or the other. And the government wants to please A, B, C, D, E, one way or the other, to keep them to their side. So it's always reacting to actions. So we are always back to square one. No real development, no real improvement in so many sectors. But Burgan Oilfield is paying for it.
What role can newspapers like yours play in continuing political reforms in this country? How much can you use your newspaper distribution, your television audience to promote ideas and opinions that promote political reform?
Look, the embassy here, Hatem will tell you, and the other guys at the embassy here, that we here, for example, I can talk about myself, we criticize a lot. We talk a lot. Frankly, we have the freedom of press. I mean, we can say whatever we want. But at the end of the day, I can talk to you till morning about freedom of press and how much we can change and how much we can be involved and how much we need help from you, the Americans, and all this. But at the end of the day, I, for one, who's talking to you, I'm a journalist, I run a newspaper and a TV station, but with my small family, I'm also a businessman. And I have interests. And sometimes I think, as long as I'm making that much of money, I mean, who cares that much about all such reforms? Frankly, at the end of the day, I would worry about my kids. I don't know what will my kids face. But then I think that if I can make enough money to save, to give them enough savings so that they should worry about their kids in the third and fourth generation. That's the system here. Whether the rulers wanted it this way, it just happened this way, but that's the system. People here are lazy. Now the worst thing happened to increase this way of thinking is the invasion, is Saddam. I mean, Saddam invaded Kuwait. In 7 months' time, he's out. Most of the people of Kuwait were outside this country, living in 5-star hotels, enjoying life. It was a 7 months vacation. Then we came back. Most of the country was intact. In few months, the oil field fires, if you remember, were off, and we're back to normal. So people now have in the back of their minds, what's even worse, that after that, we signed treaties with the 5 powers of the world. What shall I?
So does the population being lazy mean they're happy? And if they're happy, then why involve themselves in political reform? Why change the status quo? Why change the system as we know it if they're happy with the way things are? And if they are, then maybe the democracy level here in this country is as high as it's going to get because there's no urgent need to push it any further.
That's the case. The problem is the majority are happy because they don't think further than their noses. They are happy today not knowing that it's because of one source of income that might disappear. I mean, today everybody's happy because we are selling oil at around $50, $60, I don't know how much. 5, 6 years ago, it reached $6 or $5 or $6. And this can happen. Alternatives can be discovered. Things can go wrong. But the majority does not think that far. Unfortunately, usually, you need leaders who should guide people, including telling them where to focus, where to think. That's not the case here. If you have a leadership with an average age of over 70, 75.
You mentioned Saudi Wahhabism, Sunni Wahhabism. Is that threat growing in Kuwait with kind of a vacuum, or is Kuwait at least not?
Sir, the problem is with the Saudis. I'm not worried. I'm not worried about Kuwait as much as Saudi Arabia itself, because exporting their problems to here is not the case. Where we are situated geographically, traditionally, from all aspects, something goes wrong in Saudi Arabia, automatically we are affected here. It doesn't have to be exported to Kuwait. And I feel that things are, I don't want to use the word unstable, but things are worrying in Saudi Arabia.
Well, you're certainly not optimistic about Saudi Arabia.
At all. At all. At all. At all.
Because the ruling government in Saudi Arabia still hasn't broken away sufficiently from the clerics, the ruling clerics, in terms of what government policy ought to be.
If you want to go one step further than that, Islam is a great religion. It's a very great religion. Unfortunately, the Saudi regime, starting with the father, Abdulaziz, created something where Islam was, since Abdulaziz took over, Islam was looked at as, they were looking at tiny things like women not going out, staying at home, that's right or wrong, wearing the cloth short or wrong, growing a beard or not. Other than that, you are not allowed to discuss anything, you are not allowed to argue anything. Where before that, one of the greatest things of our religion, Islam, we learned that, and we read, that Islam is a religion, although it started 1,400 years ago, but it's a religion for all times. That means that we are supposed, we are encouraged, we are forced in our religion to always sit with what you call the intellectuals, to think of how to adopt modern ideas and techniques so that Islam will always be working in every time. The Saudis stopped that, Abdulaziz. And that's the worst thing that happened to Islam, where we stopped, or they forced people to stop thinking of the future, modernizing Islam, and look at the tiny bits and pieces which are peanuts, nothing. Look today at the Ikhwan Muslimin in Egypt, for example. They don't mind women mixing with them, they don't mind women voting, they don't mind mixing, playing the political game. And that's real Islam, not the Saudi version, which ended up by, unfortunately, you feeling the worst part of it. You feel the worst part of it, and the worst is still to come.
Well, what do you mean by that?
It happened once,
Right.
the very bad thing. The system there still, I mean, they are only trying to by force these days. I don't know if
For
you,
the madrasas and the schools that,
even the small tiny groups who are known to be non-terrorists, if you go back to, I'm sure a lot of footage is available, we saw it on TV. Every time the Saudi forces finds out that one of those terrorists is hiding in a house, they attack the house. There is only one or two hiding there. You'll see the 10 houses to this side and 10 houses to this side, all destroyed, all demolished. They use rockets and airplanes and tanks and guns, and then they lose 5, 6, 10 police officers just for killing one. They are so tough. The simple fact that simple people in Saudi Arabia watching this are becoming more sympathetic with the terrorists. Why a lot of people are going to Iraq now?
I hate to have to cut it off on a pessimistic note, but I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. Unfortunately, as the congressman said, we've had a very packed scheduled day, and we've got to get to a dinner with the ambassador. So I apologize. We don't have more time to.
Because we have
Quick questions?
2 minutes.
Yeah, why don't we do it?
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple more minutes.
Yeah.
Actually,
2 or 3 minutes.
as President Bush, he said we are wrong that the United States for 50 years, support the dictatorship. Now the United States turns over and try to make the democracy everywhere as a way to fighting the terror. But suddenly we find the state, support like one of Al-Qaddafi, and he has a bad history, even trying to kill King Abdullah. So the youth people, the young people, they don't trust the United States, that the United States really want to support the democracy. Everyone want, the democracy everywhere. But in the Arab side, they didn't trust the state. Whatever Bush do, whatever he visit any Islamic center, they want to prove. Mr. Jason Boudet maybe want mention that don't ever wait until the fire show up, then you try to do your job. Your job should start even in Kuwait, even everywhere. If you have a deal to deliver democratic to the people, not just to the ruler, to make a new shape of ruler, just to say we are support the democratic. This question: do you believe in Mr. Bush point of view of a new Middle East?
Well, it's an interesting question. Maybe Steve would like to. I think we all should answer that question. Steve, why don't you start?
Here's my sense of it, and it's just one opinion. But we as a democracy also have an obligation to respect the sovereignty of other nations, and in this case, Kuwait. The reason that we're in Iraq is because, yes, Saddam had a very brutal regime, but as long as he did not act outside his borders, we had to more or less respect his sovereignty. It's just like North Korea. North Korea has a very bad regime. You know what? But Kim Jong-il is acting within his borders. We really have no pretext, or at least not until he acts outside his borders for perceiving a threat to democracy or a threat to U.S. interests. That's why we're in Iraq. And we don't just pick countries to invade. The fact that he fought a 10-year war with Iran, fired Scud missiles into Israel, invaded Kuwait, used chemical weapons against the Kurds. All these things sort of showed us that he had a willingness to act outside his borders. He didn't respect the sovereignty of Kuwait. And not only the United States, but a lot of other countries agreed that he had gone too far and needed to be acted against. So, yes, we would like to see democracy spread. We'd like to see greater individual rights for every person. And in fairness, for our own record, as a nation, we have provided more democracy on this earth than any other nation. We have provided more individual rights for all the people on this earth than any other nation. We have sent our sons and daughters to guarantee the individual rights of citizens of other nations. And we hope, look, we have a lot of things we need to take care of ourselves, and we are, I guess, in Todd's words, an emerging democracy as well. We can do better. We're not perfect. We're working every day. Democracy isn't neat and tidy. It's always evolving. But we're doing our best. And we're not perfect. We're doing our best. And it's, we have a true democracy. In 2 more years, we're going to have a new president, democratically elected. It might be a Republican. It might be a Democrat.
Actually, in Kuwait, we believe in that because we get the American help. But in Saudi Arabia and Syria and in another country, they think that you are the most nation or the most department that sent its army outside, the country to killing. They think like this. So you had to send the army and the really democratic. I mean, what about Syria now? The Assad. He's doing it inside his border. In his border. So you'll keep him like.
Lebanon.
No, okay.
That's certainly arguable.
He killed Hariri. I don't know. He used to cooperate with that investigation.
If he didn't cooperate with the UN, what's your reaction as a great nation?
Well, I think we need to talk to other great nations around the globe and figure out a consensus course of action.
I think that's what we did in Iraq. In Kuwait, we went to the UN. I mean, remember the president went to the UN in the fall of 2002, made the presentation. The UN Security Council unanimously voted, including Syria, said to Saddam, do this or else. I mean, we didn't do it on our own. We did go and develop that consensus of the world community that said, action needs to be taken. And 6 months later, action was taken, and with 30 plus nations having military forces. So I mean, we don't, in trying to just be unilaterally out there, but we're going to defend ourselves. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, in defending ourselves, we've also liberated 50 million people. And given them the opportunity of democracy. In the end, it's going to be up to those 50 million people whether they, truly achieve lasting democracy. We're not going to be able to make that happen. They're going to have to do it for themselves.
In the words of one of our founding fathers, Samuel Adams, he said that with respect to our revolution, the American Revolution, the revolution was in the hearts and minds of the people. And so we can do as much as we can for the Iraqi people, but it needs to be in their hearts and minds whether or not they want this democracy. And they're going to need to defend it. They're going to need to die for it.
But there's something else you can do, sir. Today, I, for one, believe that in the Middle East, Israel is the most advanced, respected democracy in this part of the world. If the United States can simply overcome the problems happening and export the Israeli model to the rest of the Arab and Middle East countries, that would be the best thing you can do.
Well,
But it
won't
goes to
be
this
it won't be
respect for the
United
sovereignty.
States.
I mean,
Yeah.
it comes back to.
You know what?
It won't be America exporting.
I think another model though, Afghanistan. They developed their own emerging democracy. You know, if you read the Constitution of Afghanistan, you know, it establishes the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, but it does give rights to women. There are a lot of imperfections, but it's a brand new democracy. I think the people need to have ownership of their own government, and I think they need to work. There's a process here that they'll work through that democratic process and amend their constitution and make those corrections as they go forward, just as we have. Our constitution has been amended many times. It's still not perfect. It's a work in progress, but I don't think we can export either our democracy or Israel's democracy. I think you know, Kuwait needs to have its own democracy, and it may not be the same as everyone else's. Different principles and different values will apply.
If I could just add, it brings us back to where we started, your question about the women's vote and our meeting with the women, you know, prior to coming here, is your statement of Sam Adams, the hearts and minds. You know, and those women we met with, in their hearts and minds, you know, the time has come.
They're passionate. They're ready to go.
But it's going to be up to all the people of Kuwait whether that passion carries forth, you know, in a majority sense. And you know, in the end, that's what's going to guide every nation's march to democracy, is the people of that nation.
By the way, our women are passionate here. Our women are tough here in Kuwait. And because of a long time, because of being a small country, a wealthy small country, almost every male has at least relatively good amount of wealth. So you either listen or pay. And most of the time we listen because so that we don't pay.
We want to thank you for your time. We cannot.
Anytime, sir.
It was a short time, but you know,
Anytime.
we enjoyed it.
Pleasure.
Take care.
Enjoyed the dialogue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Tough, really.
They are very bright and articulate.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting.
We're always.
Thank you very much.
Right now, we're not showing time of the day, that's for sure.
Always a pleasure.
What's Saudi Arabia?
I'm John Petrilli from MC. I think we met a couple times before. Yes.
Yes.
You have our cards. Contact us by email or whatever, and stay in touch with us.
I'll be in touch.
Why don't you do that? And we can tell you what's going on our side of the ocean there. We'd love to hear from you periodically as to what's going on. So feel free to contact us.
I will.
Please. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.